So I will now introduce the first speaker of this session, Professor Rob Kitchin. He's professor at the Maynooth University at the Institute of Social Sciences Institute. Rob is one of the most prolific writers across the social sciences. He has published over 30 books and over 200 articles and book chapters, and as well as delivering over 270 invited talks and conference presentations. He has been editor of some of the most prominent international academic journals, such as Dialogues in Human Geography, Social and Cultural Geography, and Progress in Human Geography. He has led a number of research projects on smart cities and digitalization, funded by national and European research councils, and is currently principal investigator on the Data Story project, funded by the European Research Council. So please come, Robin and
Thanks.
Rob, and let's listen to Making a Difference Beyond the Academy.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for the introduction. One of the things I noticed earlier on is I had a quick look at my Twitter thing, and I realised that photo was from the conference in Rotterdam, from the Beyond the Smart City, and I'm wearing the same jumper, which explains why there's a hole in the bottom of it as well. So yeah, I'm going to talk about making a difference beyond the academy, and it really goes back to work I started actually quite a long time ago. I think the first special issue I did on this was 1999 on an issue called Critical Geographies in Action. And then a few years later did a book called Radical Theory, Critical Praxis, Making a Difference Beyond the Academy. And it was part of a whole series of long-standing debates around the role of academics in society and the purpose of research. And there's been a whole series of these debates going on in geography over quite a long period of time. And people like David Harvey, Jamie Peck, Doreen Massey, the whole load of people have kind of had these debates about what should we actually be doing. Is our job to critique? Is it our job to intervene? Is it to be active? And so on. And it hinges on a whole set of beliefs to the extent to which, do we think that research should simply produce knowledge about the world, or should we be actively trying to change that world? Should academics work with or for the state, industry, civil society actors, or should it be independent from them? So just to kind of run through those, and you might start to work out how you fit into these kinds of things, because they make the decisions about the kinds of work that we do. So the first position is we produce independent knowledge. So the academy should produce independent, impartial knowledge. We should leave our politics at the gate. We conduct objective, neutral research. We act in a value-free manner, and so on. So this is very obviously fits within a kind of positive framework, but it fits within other kinds of notions of science as well. So we detail findings. We might set out policy options and the various pros and cons, but we actually leave it to others to make the choices about whether they want to implement them or not. So that's not our job. We leave the politics and the policy to those actors. We do the research and maybe make suggestions. That doesn't preclude us from doing things like commission research on behalf of state or industry, but there's a notion in which the research is meant to be objective, impartial, non-prescriptive. Or we can say, we're not going to leave our politics at the gate. We ourselves are political actors. We have a vested interest in what's going on, and that we're going to take an active role in this. And the notion that we are independent and impartial is a nonsense. We're always political. We're situated within the work. We have a positionality, and we also have a kind of an ethics of care or a duty to actually do things rather than to be kind of impartial and independent. So rather than try and deny those kind of politics, we kind of embrace them and we mobilize them within academic endeavor to actively try and seek change in society. But we can do that in different ways. So we can have that as a separation. And we kind of, we do an assessment and critique of the state and industry's work. We try to hold them to account for expressions of power and for structural violence. But we necessarily have this distance to try and ensure that there is critical distance, that there is independence, that there is scientific autonomy. But actually for a number of academics, particularly within the kind of critical radical tradition, is that we don't end up being co-opted into or becoming complicit in or legitimizing the actions of the state. So this is often where these kinds of debates have kind of gone on, even within kind of radical theory, critical social theory, and so on, is that we shouldn't be working with the state or working with industry. It's our job to hold them to account and be separate from them. That's not our role. And as in our book on the Make a Difference Beyond the Academy, I think Don Mitchell makes that argument that it's not his job is to critique, it's not to to work with, and so on. Chris Allen makes a similar kind of argument in a dialogues debate around this kind of policy as well. So a number of people have kind of held that kind of position. So you kind of you critique, you make suggestions, you advocate for particular interventions to seek change, but you don't get into bed with the actors that you find problematic. Okay. Second one is we can take a role of an activist or an activist. So we kind of say, look, critique and hold into account is not sufficient in terms of intervention because we're basically talking to ourselves. My article in Dialogues in Human Geography is not being read by policymakers or by industry actors or others and so on. And that we need to be active. We need to become political actors in some way. And we need to do that individually, and we need to do it collectively, and to start to have some kind of engagement, meaningful engagement in the processes in which we're trying to critique. At the same time, we want to maintain a kind of distance from hegemonic power and avoid being enrolled into that power. So what that often means is we act as an activist, so in our own way, and get involved in protests or movements or and so on, or being an advocate and lobbying for certain kinds of interventions. We're directly opposing the work of state and industry, and most often we're probably collaborating with civil society actors, organizations, local communities, and so on. So we're still distanced, we still have the critical distance, and it might involve doing research around participatory or action research, kind of formulating, promoting policy alternatives, working with kind of NGOs or civil society, civil liberties groups, and so on, and undertaking advocacy kinds of work. And then the last one is we become a critical friend, and we say we are actually going to work with state and industry. We're prepared to do that. We're prepared to go along and try and share knowledge, to try and influence from the inside what might be going on. So we're going to try and seek change through engagement, through partnership, through co-creation with state and industry, as well as with civil society and other actors. And we recognize that we're just going to hold different views, different politics, different aspirations, and try to work out how we're going to negotiate that and how we're going to deal with potentially being complicit in what those projects end up doing. Okay, so that's the I guess the danger of this is the potential complicity in what actually ends up happening, because we want to try and achieve our ends by seeking change from within. So in a sense, we're trying to act as a critical friend rather than as a stooge. And that's kind of the thing, these kind of debates have been going on, and we kind of have to find a position in it. And my position is basically as the critical friend. This is the tactic that I've kind of, if you like, taken as my approach to smart cities research. These kind of debates fit within Michael Borroway's kind of taxonomy of social sciences research. So this is another way of kind of framing or thinking about this. He basically splits academic research into two axes. There's research that's aimed at an academic audience, and research that's aimed at beyond the academy, and then there's kind of more instrumental knowledge, more kind of science-based knowledge, and more reflexive knowledge, more kind of critical social theory based kinds of knowledges. And all I've done here is map it onto the discipline of geography. You can map it onto your own disciplines. So I kind of got professional geography in the top left of the box, well, in the middle of the chart here, but the top left of the kind of the grid, which is kind of very scientific kind of notion of geography. We're typically talking to our peers. It's this notion of the independent, the impartial, and so on. Underneath we have the kind of critical geography, so more kind of critical social theory, more around kind of maybe ideas of justice and politics and morality and equality and all this kinds of stuff. Very much kind of critiquing, reflexive about what's kind of going on in society and so on. But generally we're talking to our peers. On the far column then we've got kind of applied policy geography, so kind of more instrumental knowledge, so kind of policy kinds of work and so on. And then in the bottom corner we've got participatory kind of public geography, where we're really trying to talk beyond necessarily government stakeholders, but also to the general public and to other kinds of groups, to civil society groups, and so on, and to be that maybe be more reflexive, whereas the kind of the top applied is obviously more kind of instrumental kinds of forms of knowledge. And so my own research really, I've been trying to kind of work through thinking through these kinds of things and then how we kind of fit within them. So, critical analysis is important in terms of generating fundamental insights and informing praxis, but it usually has quite limited impacts beyond the academy. And my kind of belief is that kind of the best way to try and enact positive progressive change is to proactively seek the desired outcome, is to actually get involved and to try and influence actors and to try and shift the agenda and to get people to think differently, maybe push them out of their comfort zone to think about things in a different way and maybe try and alter the approach. So it's to contribute knowledge, ideas, potential solutions and resources, which obviously all take time, energy, networks, institutional capacities, reputation and so on, to stakeholders, to be an advocate and to lobby for policies, to try and offer constructive feedback, facilitate workshops, deliver training, all these kinds of things. I'll talk a bit more about those afterwards. And that, my belief is kind of the effective way to produce change desire is to gain the insider position and to live with the complicity, basically, to negotiate that. So if I go back to Borowai's chart, and then I kind of mapped in the kinds of things that I'm doing, I've kind of left the professional box empty in the sense that my work is critical. It is rooted in kind of critical geography, critical social theory. So I'm kind of down on the academic side. I'm down in the bottom box there. And I'm doing fundamental research. I'm trying to think through the theory. I'm trying to do critical appraisal. I'm trying to do academic papers, presentations, and so on, where I'm talking to my peers, which is precisely what I'm doing now, with the exception of a couple of people down here. We're talking to ourselves, right? We're not talking to practitioners, and so on. The applied side, though, is a whole range of different things coming through a number of different projects. Probably the one that's done the most work around this is the Programmable City project, which was a 5-year ERC-funded project where we did a lot of work with actors in Dublin and to a certain extent within Boston and a couple of other cities with different projects. But we got involved in consultancy research, things like the smart lighting kind of evaluation in Dublin. We did that for the local authority. We kind of did the scoping study on that for them. We built the city dashboard for them, so we created the dashboard for the city and maintained it. We produced policy reports for them. We produced guidelines and recommendations. The ethics policy of the city is based on work that came out of some of the stuff that we did for them. We did ethical audits for them, and so on. We sat on their advisory board. So we sat on their advisory board right from the start. Actually, before Smart Dublin existed, we were already on the board, working out pre it coming into existence, doing that work. We were on the board of Dublin, which is the open data repository. Myself and Tracy L'Oreal did a lot of work around the open data there. Doing presentations to professional audiences, going along to industry events, going along to events organised by state actors, and then going down into the participatory public kind of geography, trying to do kind of engaged research with stakeholders, so kind of joint bids around different bits of work and so on, co-organising workshops, writing newspaper ads and doing blogs, doing social media, doing public debate on radio, bits of TV, and so on, participating in civic hacking, so actually going along to the hackathons, taking part in them, and so on. So Sophia's here did a bit of work with some of that. Advocacy kinds of work, so kind of lobbying around particular policies and so on. And then, they're all at the kind of double level. At the national level, we're also doing some of that work. So we're kind of on the Taoiseach's data forum, which is the Prime Minister's data kind of group. Things like on Central Statistics Office boards and Ordnance Survey, which is the National Mapping Agency work and so on. So we're kind of doing various bits of kinds of work to try and influence what's going on. We did if you've seen the report on kind of ethics and smart cities, that was for the Taoiseach's department. So this work was, we were trying to do research that would be mutually beneficial. So there was definitely a sense of which the city was gaining things. They were leveraging off of our project and our funding. We were organising workshops for them. We were doing advice for them. We were running events and doing all kinds of bits and pieces. So, but we were building on existing relationships. So we've been doing work for local departments, regional government, national level government departments for a long time, for back to late 90s, early 2000s. So we had a base and we had networks that we could leverage off of. We did a swap arrangement. So we basically swapped things. So the team contributed to governance, to policy formation, to agendas and visions, to scope and working of projects, to data work and so on. And what we gained on the other side was access to key personnel. We were allowed to interview, for example, within Dublin City Council, everybody from the CEO down, anybody we wanted to talk to, with the exception of one researcher on the project, Bob, who had to do everything through FOI. So we had one person who was kind of person non grata because he was looking at extremely problematic project inside of the thing around how the procurement had worked and had failed, basically. So so we had one person who was kind of outside the loop, everybody's inside. Ironically enough, he then subsequently wrote the ethical document for and did the ethical audits for them a couple of years later. So, but at the time, that was a problematic thing, mainly because of various issues around police and so on. We got access to documents, we got access to data, so we got very good insider knowledge because we were sitting on the advisory boards, we were sitting on their meetings. When we were doing kind of the dashboard work, Sophia kind of worked on that project as an ethnographer. She could just sit in the room and listen to the meetings and listen to what was going on. So you got all of the internal politics of what was kind of happening and so on. It wasn't us going and doing 1 hour interviews. This is over a period of time being embedded in the organization, and you get a much, much better sense of what is actually happening in that context, as opposed to what they'll tell you in the kind of crafted narrative that you might get within an interview. We obviously co-worked on the dashboard and so on. The key thing in some ways, though, is there was no money changed hands. This purely was a swap. There was no contracts. There was no NDAs. There was nothing there other than verbal agreements that we would co-work with each other. That was the extent of it. There was nothing formal at all, which is obviously quite different in other kinds of projects. So co-funding of the project would have formalized all of the above, probably would have provided more robust obligations, but it might have also put in place other kinds of things that might have been awkward around NDAs or trying to put in place agreements about what could and couldn't be said and so on. okay, there's a number of kind of issues to deal with doing this, because you can imagine there's a lot of kind of politics involved in doing this, and there's some kinds of risks and so on. There's a whole series of kind of things to be negotiated. So negotiation of expectations, both on the stakeholders and from the funders side. So clearly what the municipalities and what other kinds of actors are expecting out of that relationship is different from what we're expecting out of the relationship. So it is a give and take. It is respecting what each other's trying to do and facilitate that and so on. There's expectations from the funders in terms of what we're going to produce in terms of output and so on, and that's the same from the university in terms of output, impact, expectations around what we need for promotion and so on is not what necessarily is the kinds of outputs that the municipalities want and so on. So there's a bit of a negotiation to go on around that. Negotiation of different roles, the kind of the internal, external politics of what's happening. There's this negotiation about to what extent you're prepared to compromise on ideals and to go along with some things and to try and block or step out of other things and so on. You know, this notion you could potentially become complicit in or kind of aid the kind of academic washing of quite problematic initiatives. And at what point do you have red lines and flashpoints? And at what point do you say, I'm actually stepping out of this, I can't go along with this, I'm gonna resign from the board, or I'm going to block I'm going to go to the media and say what's going on. And we've had issues of this in the past around all kinds of things. So, you know, we were doing consultancy work for the Department of Environment at the same time as we were critiquing them on the national radio and in the media. So you have a very awkward kind of relationship going on. We've had threats from data providers to say, if you don't stop talking about this, we're going to withdraw your data license, because the people you're attacking are actually our primary market for the data. And then you have to end up having to negotiate with around the kind of licensing around the data and so on. So you can get into quite messy kinds of things. The payoff, of course, is you get all the insider kinds of sense of what's actually happening. And what we try to do is have a kind of clear sense of our purpose and our boundaries, and to try and, I guess, have an idea about where our red lines actually exist. I think you do have to be prepared to be contrary. You do have to be prepared to be the awkward person in the room who is saying something that the stakeholder might not like. I'm the kind of person I'm quite happy to say that. I'm quite happy to say, I think this is nonsense, and this is the reason why I don't think you should do that. Often other people in the room are really grateful because they can't say it because they're not senior enough. But whoever's senior doesn't necessarily want to hear it, and it can cause tensions, and it can cause awkward kinds of things, and so on. And you do have to be prepared to step away, and you have to be prepared that the relationship might break down. You know, I do think there's no way around that. I do think the where matters, and I think context matters. So I can do this in Dublin. You know, if I was doing this in Dubai, I might be thinking differently. If I was doing this in China, I might be thinking differently. You know, the context matters. You know, Toronto, Sidewalk Labs, different actors took different positions on this. Some academic actors decided to go on the boards because they thought that they would be able to try and influence from the inside. A number of them subsequently resigned. A number said, I'm going to stay outside and I'm going to critique from the outside and I'm going to be the activist. You know, so people took different positions. Different academic actors took different positions in relation to that project, depending on how they felt they might be able to make a difference, or whether they felt they were going to be too compromised politically in relation to their own values and so on. So I do think you have to kind of you have to be reflexive about that and work out where you think you can do things. I mean, we had an agreement with Dublin, which is kind of great in that, you know, they had no problems with us openly critiquing them. Like Dublin City Council had no problems with us openly critiquing them. They just said, if we're doing things really badly, we'll just have to get better. Like, rather than trying to hide the critique or bury it or whatever, like, we just, you know, where other actors won't do that at all, right? They really don't want you openly critiquing them. They're quite happy to have the conversation internally, but they don't want it in the public, you know. Other kinds of issues is, you know, if you're serious about trying to do this work, so just if you're early career and you're thinking about trying to do this work, It's just maybe some advice, I guess, really, around kind of establishing the relationships. You do need some social capital to get through the door. Like, if they've not approached you and you're trying to approach them, then you need to try and leverage something. If you're near the start, then you leverage off of colleagues, or you leverage off your university, or you leverage off your unit or your department, or you find some way that you can find an in, basically. So some of it's your own profile, some of it's social capital of others. And I guess the way that we've done it over time is we've had a kind of a ladder approach. So we've started locally. Lots of local organizations, particularly civil society groups, community groups and so on, they're actually grateful of the help. They will open doors and kind of work with you, and often local authorities will as well, because they're under austerity and they're lacking resources, and anybody who's going to help them is a value, So we kind of start locally and then kind of work up, with a goal that's realistic, a contribution that's meaningful and sustainable. Going along to different events, particularly events organised by those stakeholders, and actually going and talking to people and networking, getting your face known, volunteering to help organise things, starting to do contract work for them, so actually tendering for some of the work that they might put out, starting to write for the media, start to write blogs and so on. I've always said utilise the capital of other, and then you kind of work your way up the ladder. Basically, that's how we've kind of progressed. We always make it clear that we'll be a critical friend. So we always say we will critique you. Like we're not just going to go along with everything you say. We will, and we have red lines. Like, we try to be quite open about this. But if we agree with what you're doing, then we will do our best to support you and to try and help that happen, because it's things that we want to happen. So we'll help do that. This is this kind of thing, I guess, about the public sector politicians are fine with critique. I think this varies in places. In Ireland, they're quite open to this. I mean, and lots of politicians are used to being critiqued all the time, right? That's basically what they're dealing with constantly. And they're used to robust discussion, they're used to debate. So as long as it's clear and logical what the objections are, that the engagement is backed with some rhetoric and some evidence, that they can see where it's constructive and fruitful, and they can see how you're maybe trying to advance an agenda, they're normally all fine with it. They might reject it, but they're not going to cut you off. They're kind of okay with that. We also had very clear agreements about what publications could come off the work, and they never try to block a single academic publication that we published on the programmable city. We never had any problems with any of the publications, actually. Even though we were often critiquing them in the academic press, I guess. We were also prepared to make compromises. So we were willing to do that, in order to try and influence plans, decision-making actions. We were prepared to tolerate approaches and decisions and policy as part of a longer game to kind of maintain the insider position, rather than either stepping away or being frozen out. So we politically ourselves decided we would live with that. Whereas, some of you might feel, I'm not prepared to do that, right? But we felt that we'd do that because this is part of a much, much longer game. Like, Smart Dublin is not going to fold tomorrow. It will be there in 2030, 20 whatever, right? It's much better to be in there trying to influence what they're doing. It might not suit all of you. You might feel that, your integrity, your independence, and your impartiality is overly compromised. We did have red lines, though, and we did step away from some things. And then in this new data storage project, which will start in 2 months' time, so this is the next ERC project, we're carrying on that work, except we're also expanding to industry. So we're also working with business on that. I actually thought that would be quite difficult, but to get them to agree. But when we announced the project, I had like 5 or 6 companies immediately say that would be great. You can stick an ethnography in here, and we'll let you work with the data, and we'll whatever. So I was quite interested in that they were prepared to do that. Maybe when I turn up, it might be different, and when we sit down and say exactly what we're actually going to do, it might be a bit different. But I'm hoping that will work. And we have artists and creative writers on that project, and we're embedding them inside of those organisations, along with the postdocs. So there will be jobs on that project. By the way, I'll give a quick advert. There's a few postdocs and a research fellow on that project. From the city side, I mean, you're obviously having to negotiate this as well. So you're kind of hearing how we're coming out from our side, where we're coming from it. So you're having to deal with exactly the same issues in a lot of ways. And I guess it is just kind of understanding what the expectations of academics and universities are regarding our kind of independence in communication of work. Around, we have to be open and transparent about what we're doing. We might have IBRs, institutional. Should be IRBs, is it? Institutional review boards around ethics and all this kind of stuff. We have expectation around publications. We have an expectation around being able to kind of explore and experiment as opposed to being very straitjacketed and kind of what we're going to do. We're clearly not consultancies in terms of how we kind of work and our independence and what we're seeking to do and so on. You'll probably know this already from working with academics. You should expect some dissent and negotiation. We're not going to just say what you want us to say, which consultancies often will do. And then we always have problems around IPR and NDA. Like it's just, my university will not let me sign an NDA. It just wouldn't work, right? And interestingly, Dublin now got itself into NDA problems with NDAs with companies, and they won't sign them now around research because they basically lost their own intellectual property to whichever company they were working with around what they were doing around the IPR here is intellectual property rights. So I think you just need to be kind of careful around those kinds of issues. Well, then, just to conclude, there's a whole number of issues here that shape making the difference beyond the academy. There's issues around academic approach and beliefs, those kind of four things at the beginning around kind of impartial and the kind of the politics, this kind of the epistemology, I guess, and the politics, ideology, I guess. There's a whole series of issues around institutional and structural issues, and there's issues around resourcing and capacity. For us, working with the stakeholders have had benefits. So, the insider access to people, to documents, to knowledge, to data, to being able to influence the agenda, the vision, the policy, the programs, the ethical kind of frameworks, all of that kind of stuff. Access into things like new lines of funding and new kind of co-creation, co-bids around research. And while there are benefits, there are potential pitfalls that require quite careful consideration. But in our view, they're worth the endeavour and worth the risk. So my approach on this has actually been very pragmatic and political. It's how can I best research an issue, aid the stakeholders, and to try and influence, oppose, and forwards alternative views, and to try and do that. For me, trying to do that most effectively is to try and do it from the inside, as opposed to just doing it from the outside, where I actually have more limited knowledge and more limited ability to influence what's happening. And I think that's me done.